You just called my baby bear babe, didn't you? My husband-to-be, Stanley, works as a delivery person, and we were at his parents' home to announce our marriage. However, I had a feeling that things wouldn't go smoothly with my mother-in-law, despite it being our first meeting. Calm down, Mommy Bear. Let it go just for today, since it's a joyful day. Interestingly, this mother and son used to call each other Mommy Bear and Baby Bear. Oh, I'm sorry, Joanna. I just couldn't keep quiet because I heard you call Stanley Babe. Please be careful about that from now on. I felt uncomfortable with this mother and son and decided to maintain a reasonable distance from my mother-in-law from that day on. However, when my mother passed away, my mother-in-law made an unbelievable comment that changed our relationship. Your mom died from an illness, right? You're lucky, Joanna. You're an only child, so you'll get all the insurance money. At the funeral, my mother-in-law seemed happy about my mother's death, and Stanley supported her in this. My name is Joanna, and I am 33 years old. From a young age, my parents were always busy with work, but now I understand that they worked hard to ensure I didn't lack anything. However, as soon as I was old enough to remember, I was often left at my grandparents' house nearby. From elementary school, I would go to my grandparents' house so I wouldn't have to be home alone, but the constant absence of my parents was a bit lonely for me at that time. My grandmother was very kind, seemingly trying to fill that void, and always paid attention to me. She always had my favorite snacks ready when I returned from school and would help me with homework and play with me, which made me love her dearly. My grandfather seemed a bit aloof compared to my grandmother, which was a little scary, but he always waited for me in front of the house when it was time for me to come home. Thanks to my hard-working parents and the grandparents who always watched over me, I was able to grow up without any hardships, and now I can only feel grateful. However, perhaps because of my upbringing, my dream has been to become a housewife, supporting my husband and children daily and perfectly managing household chores. I would be thrilled to build a beautiful house and live there leisurely. After graduating from high school, I went to college and then chose a stable company from the job offers I received, starting my career as an office worker. I wasn't looking for a fulfilling or idealistic job, it was merely a means to earn a living. Of course, I did my work properly, but my goal was to leave on time every day. The workplace had a great atmosphere with no one making snide remarks, and I felt it was a good fit for me. However, having a strong desire to get married, I intended to quit my job once I got married. But reality didn't provide that opportunity, and before I knew it, 8 years had passed, and I had turned 30. Initially, I was resigned to working just to make ends meet, but as I gained experience, I began to find fulfillment in my work. It was during this time that I met Stanley, a delivery person who was 5 years older than me. One day, tired from work and walking home distracted, I met him. Without noticing him carrying a large package, I bumped into it and fell over. "Oh, I'm sorry. Are you okay?" Stanley immediately came over to help and spoke to me. In reality, I had only slightly hit the package, but being tired, I fell more dramatically than expected, and out of embarrassment and dismay, I couldn't get up right away. "Yes, I'm fine. I'm sorry for not looking where I was going." As I said this, I looked up at Stanley's face for the first time as he offered me his hand. At that moment, I fell in love at first sight. His appearance just happened to match my taste perfectly. Stanley carefully checked to see if I was injured, but I was just fixated on his face. "I'll give you my business card, so if you find any injuries later, please contact me here." I took the card and also told him my name. After rearranging his package, Stanley took off his hat and apologized, saying, "I'm really sorry about that. Please excuse me," before hurrying back to his work. Fortunately, I didn't feel any pain in the following days, but part of me was disappointed about that. Since that day, I found myself unable to get Stanley out of my mind. Distracted at work and making more mistakes, I decided to confront my feelings. "Hello, this is Joanna. I'm the one who bumped into you during work the other day." "Oh, are you okay? Were you injured?" Stanley sounded very flustered and concerned over the phone. "No, I wasn't injured at all. I'm sorry if this upsets you, but I've been thinking about you since that day. I apologize for the suddenness." My head went blank with nervousness, and both my voice and hands were trembling. "Thank you. If you don't mind, we could meet up sometime." This phone call led to us making plans to have a meal together. A few days later, we met again, and seeing him in stylish casual clothes, compared to his work attire the first time, I felt my heart flutter once more. We had dinner at a restaurant Stanley had reserved. Initially, we were both nervous, but as we had a few drinks, we gradually opened up and conversation flowed. I began to think that Stanley might be my destiny. Just before meeting him, I had visited a fortune teller, recommended by a coworker, which I usually wouldn't do. "The man of your destiny is older, exactly your type, and you will meet him very soon," the fortune teller had said. I don't usually believe in such things, but this time it was so accurate that I couldn't help but think it was fate. Indeed, talking with Stanley was so enjoyable that time flew by. Not wanting our time together to end and wanting to spend more time with him, I took a bold step and asked, "If you're not seeing anyone right now, would you consider going out with me?" To which Stanley replied, "Thank you, Joanna. If you're okay with me, then absolutely." And that's how our relationship began. A few months later, my father passed away unexpectedly. On his way to work, he had a heart attack and passed away. It's shocking that my dad, who left the house as usual saying "see you later," never came back. Unable to think of anything due to the shock, and unable to focus on work, I took a few weeks of paid leave. I think I worried Stanley since I couldn't contact him, but even though I didn't reply, he frequently sent me messages of concern. "Joanna, are you okay? Just think about your dad for now. I'll wait for your contact until you feel fine." Without abandoning me as I couldn't respond, Stanley always cared for me and continued to offer warm words. Months passed, and as my daily life gradually returned to normal, Stanley proposed to me. "I can't replace your father, but from now on I want to be the one to support you. Please marry me." Moved by Stanley's feelings, I immediately nodded yes, tears flowing freely. I later learned that when he was a university student, he lost his father to an illness and has lived with his mother ever since. That's why when I lost my dad, he could empathize with my feelings as if they were his own. A few days later, we went to Stanley's home to introduce ourselves for our marriage. Stanley's mother, who greeted us, was a very beautiful woman. "Thank you for coming, Joanna. I'm Diana, Stanley's mother. You can call me Mommy Bear." I froze for a moment at her words. It's tough to ask her to use that nickname on the first meeting. I smiled wryly inside, applauding his comment in my heart. "Yes, that's true. But take your time, and someday please call me that." Hearing my mother-in-law's words, I felt a bit more relaxed. This was because her talking about the future suggested that she hadn't rejected me outright at this stage. Still, Baby Bear has really stepped up, hasn't he? I was surprised to hear he got a girlfriend after about a year. It was about time. It seemed that Stanley's mother had been worried about him since he was over 35 and showed no signs of getting married. Once Baby Bear got a girlfriend, he rushed to move out of this house. When I inadvertently looked at Stanley, his face was red with embarrassment. I had to. If Joanna knew I was living in such an old apartment, she'd surely be disappointed. That's a bit harsh, isn't it? We've been living here together for so long. Indeed, the apartment was very small and hardly glamorous, but Stanley and his mother seemed to get along very well. Later, his mother brought out Stanley's album and started talking about his childhood. I listened warmly as it became clear that Stanley was raised with all the love his mother could give. Suddenly, his mother asked me a question. "I heard you work in an office, Joanna. How much do you make?" "I suppose it's around the average amount. I think it's less than what Stanley makes, but it's enough to live." I answered this without understanding the intention behind her question. However, I didn't know Stanley's salary, and of course he hadn't mentioned my salary either. Looking at Stanley, he seemed uncomfortable and averted his gaze from me. Stanley also works, so I believe we would manage well enough even if we had children in the future. I thought she might be asking to make sure we had enough income to raise children, as she seemed eager to see grandchildren. Less than Baby Bear. That's not good at all. You know, Baby Bear is a contract employee. Shocked by this revelation from his mother, I felt flustered and had to respond quickly. Even though he's a contract employee, Stanley works very hard. I finally understood why Stanley had looked uncomfortable. He must have been afraid of me finding out he was a contract worker. However, as the atmosphere became tense, Stanley quickly broke the silence. "Hey, Mommy Bear, Joanna is right. I've been working really hard on this job. It's been over a year now, you know." "What?" I was shocked by Stanley's sudden statement. First, it was surprising that he called his mother Mommy Bear, but more importantly, something else caught my attention. "Does that mean you haven't held any other job for more than a year?" "Yeah, that's right. I've had a hard time finding the right job." I decided to think that maybe getting married would change his mindset and didn't press the issue any further. Suddenly, his mother's face turned red with anger and she yelled, "You just called Baby Bear babe, didn't you?" It turned out she was angry because I had inadvertently referred to Stanley as babe earlier. "I'm sorry, I should have said Stanley." Overwhelmed by her intensity, I quickly apologized. "Calm down, Mommy Bear. Let it go just for today since it's a day of celebration." Stanley's words seemed to snap her back to her senses. "Oh, I'm sorry, Joanna. I just couldn't keep quiet because you called Baby Bear babe. Please be careful about that from now on." I responded with a soft yes, but I felt a chill down my spine from the eerie atmosphere. "I'm sorry for not telling you about being a contract worker." When we got home, Stanley apologized to me again. The bizarre intensity of his mother had frightened me, and I had completely forgotten about Stanley's situation. "It's okay. As long as you don't quit jobs frequently and work steadily from now on, that's all I ask for. More importantly, is your mother not against our marriage?" From his mother's behavior, it was clear she adored Stanley. I thought she would never allow Stanley to be with someone else. No, that's not it at all. In fact, she was saying how eager she was to see the bride's face. That's good to hear. Still, I was really surprised by the way she wants to be called by you. Stanley's mother, wanting to stay young, had been having him call her Mommy Bear since he was conscious enough to speak, because she resisted being called mother. The initial meeting with my mother-in-law was intense, and although I was anxious about how well we could get along, I was filled with hope for a happy married life with Stanley. I had dreamed of being a housewife after marriage, but in reality, I continued working. Partly because I no longer thought about quitting, but also because I found fulfillment in the job I had been doing for many years. Things with Stanley were going smoothly, and he continued to work without quitting his job. Just like the fortune teller said, I was convinced he was my destiny. Since I only met the problematic mother-in-law a few times a year, I managed to get by as long as I kept my mouth shut as much as possible to avoid provoking her. And I was able to show my wedding dress to my mother, so next, I was hoping to show her a grandchild. However, in the second year of marriage, my mother passed away from an illness. Since my hometown was far away, I couldn't be there for her last moments. I never imagined that after losing my father just a few years ago, my mother would pass away too. Stanley was supportive by my side, but I was very depressed and couldn't think of anything. Being the only family, I had to act as the chief mourner and somehow manage the funeral. My mother-in-law attended the funeral, but as soon as it was over and it was just the three of us, she said something outrageous. Now that Joanna's parents are gone, I'm the only one who needs to be taken care of in her old age, which must be a relief. Was that supposed to be a form of consideration for me? I couldn't believe she would say such a thing. What do you mean by that? I asked quietly, trying to suppress the anger welling up inside me. What do you mean? It's just as I said. It's the daughter-in-law's duty to take care of her parents-in-law in their old age, right? Now that there's only one person to care for instead of two, isn't that a good thing? Mommy Bear, this isn't the time to say such things. Although Stanley had always tried to please his mother and agreed with her opinions, this was something he could not condone. I don't plan on having my daughter-in-law care for me just yet, but think about it. Having fewer people to take care of means less money will be needed, so Baby Bear should feel lucky too. His mother was laughing out loud, finding something amusing about the situation. Besides, a funeral just for family is so modest yet expensive and meaningless, right? If it were me, I wouldn't even want such a small funeral. There I was, at rock bottom, yet I managed the unfamiliar task of arranging my mother's funeral and tried my best to send her off. Just as I was finally catching my breath after the funeral, my mother-in-law's relentless comments felt like physical blows, and I reached my limit. "Don't joke about this. Why would you say such things? Just stop it." Although I was shouting in my head, my voice came out weakly, apparently too soft for her to hear. She continued her verbal assault. "Your mother died of illness, right? Joanna, you're so lucky. You're an only child, so you'll get all the insurance money." Indeed, I was the beneficiary of my mother's insurance. My mother had told me that thanks to my father enrolling in numerous insurance policies just in case, she could live comfortably even after his passing, and I truly appreciated that. Just like my father, my mother also made sure to have substantial insurance. And there was my mother-in-law calling it lucky that I would receive money only because someone I loved had died. Did she think I would be happy to get that money? I could not contain my overflowing anger. "How dare you say I'm lucky? Disappear from my sight right now." To get her out of the funeral home, I grabbed her belongings and thrust them at her. Yet even as I pushed her, she began to say more selfish things. "Just think of anything you get as lucky and use it wisely. That's what being realistic is. Mourning someone who has passed forever doesn't serve any purpose. I can teach you how to spend the money." Ignoring her words, I pushed her out the door. "Hey, Joanna, that's too much." Stanley was also trying to follow his mother outside. "I'm going to Mommy Bear's place, Joanna." "You should cool off by yourself." Stanley said this and, without waiting for my response, ran off. It felt like he was blaming me and defending his mother, which deeply hurt me. At a moment when I felt most vulnerable, I needed Stanley by my side, but I was left alone, standing in shock. Even the next day, Stanley hadn't returned home. In my despair, I threw myself into my work to distract myself from my feelings. About a month later, Stanley finally came back home. "Where have you been all this time?" My emotions, a mix of despair, sadness, and anger that I thought I had suppressed, came flooding back uncontrollably. "I was worried about Mommy Bear, so I went back to my parents' house. I quit my job." I had suspected he might have gone back to his parents, but I hadn't imagined he would quit his job. My trust and affection for Stanley dwindled, and sighing heavily with sarcasm, I snapped at him. "Was that Mommy Bear's idea? We're adults, maybe it's time we both grow up and live our own lives away from our parents, don't you think?" Then, Stanley pulled out his smartphone and showed me his mother's face, beaming on a video call. "Hi, Joanna. Are you still mad?" "Baby Bear, I told you it was still too early to go back. Why did you go back already?" It appeared that the video call had been ongoing since Stanley arrived back. "Baby Bear, just go ahead and tell her already." His mother was unusually cheerful. Prompted by his mother, Stanley showed me a piece of paper. It was a listing for a villa with a pool priced at $2 million. "I bought this house for us to live in as a family," he said. I was about to ask, where did a jobless person get that kind of money, but his mother didn't allow me to speak. Joanna, remember I told you that it's a daughter-in-law's duty to care for her in-laws? You kicked me out, which means you refused to take care of me in my old age. That disqualifies you from being called Stanley's wife. You're not family. His mother said smugly, leaning close to the camera. Ignoring her, I demanded of Stanley, how could you afford such a property? However, his mother started to speak. Oh, you haven't realized? The only place that money could come from is your bank account. Finally, Stanley and I can graduate from that shabby apartment. We are so lucky. Stanley held up a bank book with my name on it, showing it to me. I quickly snatched the bank book back, but I was shocked and trembling at the criminal act of him and his mother, and I instinctively hugged myself. He had returned home while I was at work and taken the bank book without permission. This bank book had been entrusted to me by my mother when she received my father's inheritance. It also contained the inheritance I received when my mother passed away and my own savings. Seeing my distress, his mother laughed triumphantly. I just put the money that you weren't using to good use. What's with that dissatisfied look? It's wrong to just leave a large sum of money sitting in a bank. Well, if you apologize and ask us to let you be part of the family again, I might consider living together. Joanna, Mommy Bear is right. It's not too late to think it over. I want to stay married to you, but we can't continue our married life unless you apologize and make it right with Mommy Bear. Stanley added, starting to defend his mother. Despite knowing it might happen, there was no apology from him, not even an excuse for stealing from my bank account and spending my money. I was profoundly disappointed in him as a person, and for a while I was at a loss for words. You don't need to say that. Baby Bear is so kind. If he can secure a villa, he doesn't need a woman like this. Baby Bear, you should look for a new bride. His mother interjected whenever she saw a chance. After thinking for a moment, Stanley said, "You're right," and handed me a paper. Mommy Bear prepared this just in case, though I never thought we'd use it because I trusted you, Joanna. But maybe we should get it signed right now. The document he handed me was, as expected, a divorce application, but I had nothing left to lose, so I switched gears and smiled. Thank you for bringing the divorce papers. It saves me the trouble of fetching them myself. It's convenient if I never have to see you two again, I said as I filled it out immediately. While Stanley was filling his part in, I quickly packed my belongings. Since we had been living in the house he had been in alone, I left the appliances as they were. Well, goodbye then. Enjoy your life in the grand villa you bought with stolen money, I said, and swiftly left the room. I felt oddly refreshed despite everything I had lost. Taking a moment to breathe, I opened the bank book I had retrieved from Stanley. What? It shows there's still money in here. What's going on? Indeed, his mother had claimed that they bought the luxurious house with my money. However, my bank book was untouched. While I was curious about how they managed to buy the luxurious house, I was relieved to see that not a penny had been withdrawn from my account. With that peace of mind, I headed straight to the municipal office. After completing the divorce procedures, I noticed an incoming call from Stanley. Curious, I answered, and he immediately started talking about the villa's payment. Mommy Bear thinks we bought it with Joanna's money, but I actually used all the money from the stash in her house, he explained. It turned out that after discovering the large sum in my bank book, Stanley had reported it to his mother. So it turned out just as she thought. I figured as much when the insurance money from her parents went to her, it would have amounted to something like that. I was shocked at the amount when my husband passed away as well, but somehow I didn't like the idea of keeping it in the bank and just stashed it at home, she said, revealing where she had kept her savings. Hidden there was around $500,000 in cash from life insurance and other inheritances. Initially, she had deposited it in the bank, but found it bothersome to be approached about investment opportunities every time she visited, so she withdrew all her money and kept it to herself. It seems her claims to me were based on her own experiences. She probably found some sense of superiority by looking at the cash. However, that's not something one should say to someone who has lost a loved one. Having my doubts resolved, I was no longer interested in hearing more from Stanley, and I interrupted him. "What are you trying to say?" "My money wasn't touched, so I don't need to hear any other irrelevant stories." Stanley then hurriedly continued explaining. His mother was miserly, always reluctant to spend her own money. However, when she found out there was money in my bank account, she suddenly demanded he use it to buy a $2 million house. "Quickly make the down payment from that account and take out a mortgage before you quit your job," she had instructed. Following her directions, Stanley proceeded with the arrangements. But it finally dawned on him that he couldn't withdraw the money just by possessing my bank book. During my absences from home due to work, he returned several times to search for a signature I might have written, rifling through various places. Meanwhile, his mother kept pushing the plan forward, and the deadline for the down payment suddenly approached. Unable to tell his oblivious mother that he couldn't withdraw the money from the bank book, Stanley reluctantly took the opportunity to take money from her stash. He used that money for the down payment and managed to secure a loan before resigning from his job. Hearing all this, what I felt was nothing but pity, shame, and complete bewilderment. "You think I'm pitiful, don't you? That's why you should apologize to Mommy Bear, and let's start over. Then, Joanna, you can also live in the villa with us." Essentially, he was asking me to apologize to his mother and get back together with him so that I would end up paying the mortgage. The insult was too much, and I felt my anger surge. "I can't believe you have the nerve to say all this. I've already filed for divorce, so there's no chance of us getting back together. We are now strangers to each other." "No way. You just signed those a moment ago, right?" It seemed Stanley hadn't anticipated that I would file for divorce so quickly. "I left your house and went straight to the city office. So, this matter and I are no longer connected. Oh, what a relief." Saying this suddenly made me feel lighter. How am I supposed to pay off the mortgage now that I've quit my job? Since Stanley had been counting on my bank account and salary to pay off the mortgage, he was in despair. "Let me give you one last piece of advice. Why don't you get Mommy Bear to sign up for lots of insurance? Then, hopefully you'll experience the kind of luck she used to talk about with me," I said, and then I hung up the phone unilaterally. After that, Stanley tried calling several times, but I ignored all his calls. However, one day I listened to a voicemail he had left. "I really need to ask you for a favor. Mommy Bear hurt herself in the pool and can't walk on her own anymore. Everything is a mess, and I can't handle it. Could you please take over the mortgage?" It was a long message, but I listened to the end. Apparently, his mother had jumped into the pool, very reckless for her age, hit her back on the water, and couldn't get out of the pool. She was immediately taken to the hospital by ambulance, but it seems she landed badly and can no longer walk without assistance. However, refusing care from strangers, his mother pushed the responsibility onto Stanley, who obediently began caring for her as she instructed. With no knowledge of caregiving, an irritated mother said to him, "You can't take care of me at all. Use the money I have stashed in the dresser to get me into a well-equipped nursing home right away." His mother expressed her preference for professional care over Stanley's inadequate attempts at caregiving. However, since the savings had already been used as a down payment and were gone, when Stanley finally told his mother this truth, she was furious. Naturally, his stingy mother had no insurance and thus no coverage. Before the accident, his mother worked part-time but spent most of her salary on her beauty, so she had no savings. Stanley, who frequently changed jobs, was in the same situation. Finding themselves in a desperate situation, they decided to sell the luxurious house, but it seemed difficult to find a buyer. After being constantly pushed around by his capricious mother, Stanley, though fed up, couldn't abandon her and ended up living with her in a small, old apartment. Perhaps slightly reformed, he reluctantly accepted help from a caregiver and is now working hard to repay the mortgage. Listening to the voicemail, I felt nothing but pity and deleted the message. Life is indeed unpredictable. I am now leading a fulfilling life, immersed in my work. It's hard to believe I used to lack motivation and ideals in my job. I have risen to a higher position with more responsibilities, but the job is more rewarding than ever. Fortune-telling has proven unreliable. The person I once thought was my destiny now only evokes pity in me. However, in a way, he did help me realize who I truly am, so perhaps that was fate. I will continue to work hard and save money, fully enjoying my life on my